It's me and Ben here with Philosophy for the People, which I definitely just didn't read off the top because I forgot again what it was called. And today we're going to be talking about some kind of Ben Burgis classics. We're going to be hitting Rawls, we're going to be hitting Cohen, and we're going to be talking about Marx. And we're going to be trying to talk about how these three approach justice and equality. How would you frame it?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to frame it. That it's, I guess one way that I would think about it is that there's, if people know a little bit about late 20th century analytic political philosophy, and I certainly want to talk to people who don't, but if you don't, then. If you do, then you might know, okay, look, if there's, probably the two authors who are most commonly assigned in political philosophy, justice stuff within sort of analytic tradition are John Rawls and Robert Nozick. Nozick's libertarian. Rawls is a liberal in some sort of non-libertarian sense, and if you have, which if you had a really good class, you might have also been assigned this guy G.A. Cohen, who is my favorite of the bunch, who's a Marxist, and Cohen does different things in different phases of his career. He spent a lot of time arguing with libertarians like Nozick. He spends a lot of time defending Marx's theory of history. But one of the things that he does is attack Rawls, John Rawls's theory of justice. And, so the sort of general perception of this would be, okay, well, that makes sense because Rawls is a liberal and Cohen's a Marxist. And so when they're arguing about justice, when they're arguing about how much inequality is too much, then it makes sense that the Marxist is attacking the liberal from the left. And what I want to do in the essay is to try to complicate that and say, well, yes and no, that there's there's no sense in which that's true. But I think when you actually start to bring in Marx's own views about this stuff, things get a little bit less clear.
Right. I think the kind of big move in the essay is when you basically say that Marx endorses Rawls' difference principle.
Yeah, exactly. So we should probably say what that is at some point. But yeah, I think.
Yeah, this will be interesting for me because the Marx's critique of Rawls I know is from Raymond Geiss, who he uses Rawls basically as an example of kind of a perfect example of doing political philosophy in the wrong way. With his critique of ideal versus real political philosophy. So it's obviously interesting because Cohen is a Marxist, but an analytic Marxist. So he isn't coming from that angle, and he's willing to do ideal politics, but just wants to do it in a different way to Rawls.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, that's as good as any, as a way, as like a kind of takeoff point, because I don't just kind of want to, to recap, what I say.
Go read the essay.
yeah, go read the essay. I want to use it as a, jumping off point for interesting conversations. So yeah, I mean, why not do that? I mean, because I think this is something that's sort of going on a little bit in the very last part of what I wrote, but it's very much not the emphasis.
This very long essay.
Yeah,
which I kept thinking was about to end and then didn't.
Yeah, it's like the Return of the King. You keep thinking the screen's going black. Surely we're done, but no, we have to wrap up something.
It's the Shire.
Yeah, we have to go back to the Shire. Yeah, I'm really going to restrain myself better next week, I promise. But this one's been brewing for a while, so there was a lot to say. So yeah, so the very, very last part of all this, there's like a little bit that kind of wanders into the territory that you're talking about, but it's not the emphasis. But I mean, I think people who are watching, watching this, and this revolution, GTAA, like people who are into these debates. I mean, that might be where some of them are coming from. So like, I would, I'd be interested in getting into maybe hearing a little bit more from you about the guest stuff. I mean, just to maybe it's just like a 2-minute, like, I guess maybe the way to do this, like just kind of a 2-minute sort of Rawls 101, and then get into like different kinds of Marxist critiques of it.
Yeah, why don't you go on Rawls and then I can go on ideal versus real politics?
Yeah, sounds good. So so Rawls he's a liberal philosopher. I would kind of remind people that the word liberal means a lot of different things in different contexts. And one of those things.
I was going to say this means he's a Democrat, but presumably he was actually.
Yeah, Rawls himself probably was, but that's not really what that's not really what we mean when we call him a liberal philosopher. So we certainly use the word liberalism to mean like liberalism as opposed to radicalism. That's one way that the word has been very often used since going back to the 19th century even. And certainly in the context of like contemporary Anglo-American politics, we use it to make sort of we use the word liberal oftentimes in a derogatory way. I certainly use it that way all the time, to make Hillary, Bernie, Starmer, Corbyn sort of distinctions. But that's not really what we're talking about when we talk about liberalism, like philosophical liberalism. And when we are talking about that, there are different kinds of things you could mean. You could mean like, I agree with everything John Locke said or something like that. But like there is also just sort of a broader way to talk about it, that like you sort of care a lot about thinking about what sort of packages of basic rights people have. You're sort of proceeding from this this liberal assumption, and this is a sense in which honestly Karl Marx is as much of a liberal as anybody is, that that everybody of like sort of universal moral equality, everybody, whatever that package of basic rights is, everybody has it. And this is, Rawls is certainly not a liberal in the sense, even in the sort of philosophical sense of like agreeing with John Locke about everything and being very intense about property rights or anything like that. He's a liberal in that sort of more diffuse sense that I just gave. And his particular view about how to think about those packages of rights and all that is that he thinks that, he's interested in justice, in thinking about what makes the basic institutions of society just. And he thinks that the question to ask yourself is, well, would these institutions be endorsed by somebody from who is picking societies from behind the veil of ignorance, what you referred to jokingly at the end of our last conversation as reverse heaven. Yeah, reverse heaven, because it's like before you're born, and it's sort of the opposite in a weird way. But like you're going to have to live in whatever society you're designing. You don't know who you're going to be. So there are all these like really straightforward consequences to that. Like, you wouldn't want Jim Crow laws about race because you don't know whether you're going to be black or white. And then there are like sort of subtler, more interesting consequences about economic inequality, because you'd be generally just trying to advance your own interests from behind the veil of ignorance, which, is sort of, Rawls scholars are screaming out in agony over this oversimplification, but like, the just like very, at a rough intuitive approach to like why.
I mean, it's a very evocative kind of example of thought experiment, because I think one of the most common questions you get on r/ask philosophy is someone being like giving like a vague explanation of the veil of ignorance, and being like, I learned this in high school, I really want to remember what it is, tell me. So it really sticks in people's brains and is very effective in that way.
Totally, right? Because I think it does latch on to a really powerful intuition that people have about justice, that that like an institution is unjust if it's like treating somebody unfairly, and like a reasonable test of whether it's treating people unfairly is if they themselves would go along with it, or if you would go along with it if you thought you might be in their position. And yeah, I think that's like, there's a lot of complexity around it and around the way that Rawls is thinking about it. But I think that like the kind of core of it, I mean, I think it makes total sense to me that it sticks in people's heads like that. And then like the sort of part that's going to be most relevant to the kind of controversies that I'm interested in the piece, although maybe we've already said enough to sort of, launch you on guess, but I mean, like the part that's going to be most relevant to that is the sort of specific principles that Rawls thinks people would endorse from behind the veil of ignorance, which are that, okay, you obviously, racial discrimination or gender discrimination or anything like that would be bad for straightforward reasons that, that you might end up getting the short end of the stick. And for the same reason, general economic inequality would at least sort of be like, presumed guilty until proven innocent, that like, your general tendency is against it, because you might end up on the wrong end of it. You might be born into a poor family instead of a rich one, or and if you are born into a poor family, you might or might not have the sort of particular skills and winning hand to climb your way out of it. So there is this like strong presumption against economic inequality, but Rawls thinks it's a defeasible presumption, because it could be that some inequalities you'd still sign off on from behind the veil of ignorance, because you would benefit more with them there than not. So like if you have just the sort of stupid examples, right? I mean, if you have people, you have society A and society B, and society A is 100% egalitarian. Everybody has exactly the same share of the resources. And society B, we give 2% more to engineers. Then, more people want to be engineers, and they come up with like innovations that end up benefiting everybody. And that makes, and that makes the short end of the stick in that society still longer than the.
Is it Nozick, or is it another capitalist who gives the example of like the legitimate millionaire is kind of the person that people like a sportsman that people freely choose, like 1 million people give him $1?
Yeah. So, right. So Nozick has the Wilt Chamberlain example. So Wilt Chamberlain, it's a really dated reference now, but he was back when Nozick was writing.
He was good at sport.
Yeah, exactly. And very popular. Like, I think he famously, like Nozick famously claimed to have like slept with 500 women or something like that. I don't remember exactly what the number was, but it was epic numbers, and and it spoke perhaps to his larger popularity. And Chamberlain did, not Robert Nozick, who was a philosophy professor. But yeah, and so it says, okay, imagine that you so this is Nozick's like objection to Rawls. Nozick says, look, let's say Rawls is right, that like whatever the just distribution of resources is what people would sign off on behind the veil of ignorance. So, and let's assume that you started off with exactly the kind of society that Rawls thinks we should have. Everybody has exactly, as much money in their bank account as you think they should have. And then Wilt Chamberlain asked for people to, give him $1 each or whatever to watch him play basketball. That, I think in Nozick's version, it's actually ticket prices, but you can make it better and just have it be like a tip jar. So it's like, we're not even making people to do this to watch the game.
Yeah.
But
so free exchange possible.
Yeah, it's the most free exchange possible. Nozick has a line about how, look, it's according to you, it's their money to do with what they want. Like, they could spend it on whatever. He gives a few different examples of things they could spend it on. His one little pot shot is they could be spending on copies of Dissent magazine, which is a socialist magazine. I suppose if you were writing now, he would say Jacobin.
He'd say Sublation magazine, of course.
Yeah.
Everyone go to sublationmagazine.com.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't know. Is there physical Sublation magazine that people?
You can't actually buy it. There's no way to buy a Sublation magazine.
Yeah, exactly.
Soon in New Zealand and Asia, there'll be a way to buy Sublation magazine. So
nice. So So
But
yeah.
I bring up the Nozick example because I think it's
Oh,
interesting.
just gonna
We're not
say.
done.
So the result of this is that before you know it, Chamberlain is like the richest man in the world, yet even though like he's clearly not supposed to be according to your scheme. So according to you, this must be an injustice. But like, come on, no, it's not. Would be
It's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think kind of the example of the Will Chamberlain thing is interesting because it does kind of offer kind of an evocative example, but kind of the point I think that would be made by Raymond Goyce, I don't know, I don't want to stereotype Rawls, but I think Goyce very much stereotypes Rawls and uses him basically as an example to make this distinction between real and ideal politics, where on ideal politics, which is what Rawls is doing, you kind of first imagine kind of, and obviously it isn't true because obviously Rawls is from the real world, so he does in fact begin with the real world, but kind of the theory begins with an ideal world. It begins with this kind of veil of ignorance, and then we kind of imagine what a world would look like. Mm-hmm. Goyce's point is to say that you're just mistaken from the start, to not do what Cohen does and not do what Nozick does, which is to critique it kind of internally, but to critique it and say, you just started at the wrong point. What you should be doing is analyzing the real conditions that people live in, analyzing kind of the real political forces which exist, which can possibly make change, and begin with them and move with those. And so kind of like an example, like Nozick, instead of fiddling around with kind of the example, you'd pick up your copy of Capital and be like, well, that's not actually how things go in capitalism, is it, mate? You know?
Yeah.
And obviously this stereotypes Rawls. And obviously it kind of does get into difficulties with what philosophy is in the West in the 21st century. And I think that's my kind of main disagreement with Goyce, that it is a non-empirical subject. And it seems that maybe there should at least be someone kind of doing ideal stuff, even if we are really clear that kind of what matters more than that is real politics.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's good. So, right, because the Goyce stuff you're saying, I think, does get down to like a very obvious, like a straightforward kind of Marxist critique of Rawls, and the sort of Marxist that would say this would be like, and also Cohen for that matter, right? Because he's also doing ideal theory. He's thinking about sort of reasoning a priori about what standards we apply to societies. And yeah, like I said, this is like lightly touched on in the essay, but I think it's probably worth unpacking a little bit more and thinking a little bit more about, like, because I'm with you. I'm not ultimately persuaded by this critique, but I think there's like something to it, that there's like, because if you think that, I mean, if you think about like Marx's critique of utopian socialists, or Engels's critique of utopian socialists, that's like, a lot of that's about, people who are just going to be sort of like, well, look, my ear is attuned to the demands of justice, so I know exactly how a society should be organized, and I'm just gonna come up with my detailed plan, and then once we bring in political activists and organizers, like all that's left for you guys to do is to carry it out, right? That they just make sure you don't lose your copy of my book, so you can when problems arise, you can check and see what you're supposed to do, and that stuff, right? I mean, Marxism really is reacting to. It really is reacting to that, right? Because said, no, look, you have to look at the historical tendencies, like concrete material conditions, and what kind of possibilities arise and don't arise at like given points in history. Because of that, and there's some, like, there's all this big like through line in a lot of classical Marxist thought that like says like what sort of society emerges in the future is already like contained in the present in some way, and so it's like, I think there is some at least one maybe kind of uncharitable way of reading what you're doing when you're doing an ideal theory. Like I think there is a lot of grounds that Marxists could object to that from. The question is like, okay, but once we say, yeah, you're sure, right? Don't be Fourier or whatever, right? Like and have the and have the detailed plan that you think is just like, well, justice clearly tells us what we should do, and we should and so we'll just those are our marching orders, and we'll just go forth and bend reality into that shape. Or it's like, I remember Sartre has this book, Search for Method, where he has a joke about the like communist bureaucrats in Hungary who thought that they could, like, if there wasn't it's like, all right, that you needed like a subway under Budapest, and if the soil wouldn't cooperate, it was counter-revolutionary. You just kind of had to make it. Like, so it's like, all right, don't be like those people. I think there's something to that. But then the question, and I'd like to kind of hear from you how you see this, is like, okay, but sure, fair enough, but like, is there a more reasonable way to interpret what we're doing when we're doing ideal theory, like actually, that actually does still have a legitimate place once you kind of absorb that critique?
Yeah, because I think, and the other thing I think to mention is that kind of how Geuss puts it is basically that ideal political theory or ideal political philosophy submits itself basically to being applied ethics, like a form of applied ethics. But that's something I think we should probably do. Apply ethics,
Yeah, I mean, sure. Like
as a critique, that doesn't really work for me. I really mostly agree with Geuss in terms of kind of, but I think that if there's one place for the sort of kind of ideal theorizing, it is exactly philosophy, which is not to say that I'm all sympathetic to Rawls' veil of ignorance. I'm a big hater of that. But that's a different thing to kind of denouncing ideal theory entirely. Because I think really the problem for me with Rawls's ideal theory is basically by kind of taking the subject completely out of the world and doing the reverse heaven thing. It has the same problems of actual heaven, in the sense of kind of like, well, who's up there? And like, how do I get on with all the feudalists up there, and these kinds of problems, like, who is the subject which is choosing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it an ahistorical subject? And that seems to me impossible. And not just a subject, we're asking for a political subject, right?
Yeah.
And I think if we take history seriously, there haven't really been that many political subjects out of the total subjects, that have existed. How can we have even a historical subject, which like, what language are they thinking in? I know this is kind of getting a bit too, like, with philosophy, you should kind of go along with these things, but it really does seem a problem to me that kind of like, or do we just say that and I think this is the correct move, is to actually say, well, this is a modern liberal subject who's thinking these things, and we aren't, when we're doing this ideal theory, we're not making a principle for infinity. We're not making a principle for a different mode of production. We're not making a principle that can be applied to a different society. We're instead thinking through the possible principles that could be applied to our own society, without saying that this is the once and for ideal theory of justice, which applies universally, ahistorically, and so on. And that's the kind of move I would make, but I don't think it's the one that Rawls does.
No, and it's also not the one I'd make. So this could be fun. So I think, yeah, so there are like a couple issues here. One is like, is ideal theory itself like inconsistent with historical materialism? Is it inconsistent? Like, is there a legitimate role for thinking about what would count, like, trying to like figure out what would count as maximally just society, that's like sort of consistent with absorbing some of these historical materialist lessons we've been talking about. That's one question. And maybe you and I might agree more about that question. But then like the other question is, okay, well, once we've settled that, how about Rawls' specific stab at it, right?
Right.
And that's where I think you and I probably disagree more, even though I do ultimately come down on the side of saying that Cohen had a point in his criticism of Rawls.
Don't worry, I've also got a lot of hate for Cohen.
Yeah. That's whereas I love them both so much that I wrote this long essay to show how they can be reconciled. And even though Cohen does have a point in his criticism, there's still a sense in which Rawls is right. So yeah, that definitely makes it more interesting. So yeah, I guess just on the on the more general subject before going to Rawls specifically, I would say that I do think that that ideal theory is consistent with the sort of good historical materialist objections to utopianism and all that stuff. And I actually think ideal theory is fine. I think it's a totally legitimate philosophical enterprise, and it can even to some extent inform lefty political commitments. That it's consistent with all the historical materialist stuff we just said, because I want to separate out the issue of like, okay, what's possible right now? What's is, if there's certain possibilities, can sure, there's some sense, absolutely, you're doing real politics. You want to say, here are the possibilities that are contained within the present, right? Which one of these am I going to try to actualize? Like that's what you're doing, clearly. But then I think there's this slightly different question that is still that is like, okay, but how is that choice guided, right? In other words, like even if you read Capital, Marx, like that book, there's a lot of mathematical kind of analysis, but there's also a lot of like raw moral outrage that's like seeping from the pages a lot of the times, when he's when he's talking about like the struggle for the 10-hour day, and like the like child labor from people in like match factories to is like the most desperate people. This is like half-starved widows giving their kids to
and when he ironizes kind of the bourgeois moralists in the Capital, who want things to be otherwise than they are, but they can't accept kind of the real possibility of changing things. That's not him being a nihilist, right? There's clearly behind that a different theory of how things should be.
Yeah, totally. Right. Exactly. So it's like he has normative preferences. Like everybody has normative preferences. There are ways that you think you approve or disapprove of things that are going on. There are outcomes that you'd either welcome or reject. You'd have like all that stuff, right? Clearly, like because how could you not? I mean, like I think probably you'd have to be like more of a sociopath than people we call sociopaths actually are, to not like have any of that. And Marx is certainly, yeah, as you said, I mean, like there are sort of implicit moral values all over the place, and every once in a while explicit, but mostly implicit, because Marx is not a moral philosopher. He's a political economist. He's a theorist of history. He's not engaged in like philosophical reflection on these values, but he certainly has the values. And so I think, ideal theory comes in when you start doing philosophical reflection on the values. You try to think harder about what you care about and why you care about it, and how the different things you care about fit together, and all that stuff. And what I'd say, like the sort of, function of having a theory of like what would count as, as achieving maximal justice, like what that does for you is not, okay, therefore we'll make the soil comply, with the party's plan for the subway, that we'll just sort of force reality into this shape and ignore all the problem, like, yeah, I mean, be a historical materialist, understand, like this view, like have an understanding of how real history works, what possibilities it creates, and all that stuff. But then, like, when you're trying to figure out, okay, which of the possibilities inherent in the present do I want to bring into existence, that choice is guided by, hey, is it closer or is it further away from what I would consider to be justice? And it could be that, you can never get like all the way or whatever, that, whatever. There's, history is no obligation to cooperate with our desires in that way, but like, but you want to get closer, I mean, if you think that there is such a thing as progress, which, I mean, clearly, again, Marx did, it, like, you should be a weird thing to like really seriously not believe, right? Then like there has to be some way, a historical way of like measuring societies against each other and saying, okay, this is better than this, like this is a more desirable outcome than that one. And I think that's what ideal theory does for you. That'd be my argument. Now, that's all totally consistent with saying Rawls's ideal theory sucks or Cohen's ideal theory sucks. And you shouldn't believe what, and like there are huge problems in their arguments or whatever. Not my position, but I mean, like, I did want to kind of address that part before getting into the weeds about what these guys actually think and like what the good objections to those are or
aren't. Well, we're half an hour in, so do you want to switch to kind of going through, well, first starting with the difference principle and then kind of going to Cohen's even kind of stronger views on equality of opportunity and outcome?
Sure. So yeah, Rawls, so Rawls, the difference principle, we kind of said it earlier, but just to be clear, like the difference principle is the idea that people choosing societies behind the veil of ignorance might reluctantly accept some inequality because it would still, it could be like the example earlier about providing a little bit extra for engineers. So more people want to be engineers. So they'll come up with, various technical innovations that will be the productive resources of society are greater. And, that like ultimately, even if you're not an engineer, even if you don't have that potential and, you're left holding the shorter end of the stick, if that's still longer than the equal symmetrical sticks of the more equal societies, then that's still the one you should, that's still the one you might pick, right? It's like, yeah, I'd rather have, I'd rather have like slightly less of much more, right?
There's no danger of Rawls falling to the downgrading argument of like the critique of equality of outcome that basically says that if you care about equality of outcome, then in at least some cases you want to make the world poorer than it is.
Yeah, exactly. So that's Rawls. And so the two conditions he gives for accepting some inequalities in outcome are, one, that there's some sort of reasonable baseline of equal opportunity for the better outcomes, that we're not just like excluding people who could do the better rewarded jobs or whatever for arbitrary reasons, and then two, that any inequality is still works out to the benefit of the worst off. And so Cohen rejects this. Cohen thinks even though this isn't demandingly egalitarian enough, or at least this is the standard way of reading Cohen. And I should say, I mean, it's worth pausing for a second to say that I think it's easy to just sort of read Rawls carelessly enough that you think that this is an endorsement of the level of inequality that we have under capitalism, but it's really not, and it can't be. And Rawls himself, to his credit, did reluctantly eventually concede that point, by the end of his life. There's a book about this by William Edmondson called John Rawls, Reticent Socialist. It's like, look, I say in the essay, Rawls was not a radical firebrand by instinct, like, to put it mildly. Like he didn't even like to sign petitions. He was, I mean, I think he just wanted to like hang out in his study and write very abstract arguments, and I'm sure vote for Democrats every few years or whatever. But like, like he was not a troublemaker, in his life. But he did eventually come to see that his theory that like the difference principle is inconsistent with capitalism, because I mean, sure, even if you say, okay, we can have some inequality if you need it, if like not having it, is going to be worse for everybody because, incentives, et cetera. But like, come on, you don't need the average CEO making 400 times the salary of the average worker. You don't need, like some people sleeping on the streets, and like all that stuff, right? I mean, that's clearly just way beyond what the theory would authorize. And he does. I'm not going to read the essay. I go through all this, probably too much detail, but but I'll just say that like eventually he ends up sort of saying, yeah, okay, I guess probably you would need some form of socialism in order to actually have something that was consistent with the theory. He does concede the point in his last book, the Justice and Fairness, a Restatement. So big caveat to all this, but Cohen thinks Cohen doesn't even want to go along with this, because Cohen has, wants to like really sort of pick on that part about equality of opportunity. It's like, okay, what does equality of opportunity actually mean? Right? He wants to think harder about that, because it says any conception of equality of opportunity is a conception of like, okay, which obstacles to some people getting the better outcome are bad, right? Which ones should we be trying to remove? And so he calls bourgeois equality of opportunity is to the idea that, well, essentially it's the legal obstacles that we should be worried about, or the obstacles that are about status, where status means like race or caste, or, whether you're born as a peasant or a noble, or things like that, like things that aren't about your individual characteristics, but are about like, your group identity, where like,
I was thinking if kind of in the 15th century, there was a better chance of an English peasant becoming a noble than there is currently of kind of like a young boy from like a very marginal family becoming a billionaire, and I wasn't sure which the answer was.
Yeah, I mean, probably still the second, but but yeah, maybe in some forms of feudalism there is some weird mechanism, for.
Well, I mean, there's always mechanisms. We really stereotype past societies, right? They're never actually as brutal, and because we basically like the form of feudalism that exists in our conception is something we've made up, right?
Yeah. I mean, right. So I think that like, I mean, typically, like, if you have serfdom, at least that kind of feudalism, then the serf is like legally not allowed to even leave, like, never mind, set up for themselves. So like, that's like a pretty severe violation of bourgeois equality of opportunity. And it's like what, the liberal revolution, like the bourgeois revolution was about. And it's, whatever, for that matter, it's like what the civil rights movement was about, that they having saying you can't have these arbitrary obstacles to individuals getting better outcome based on their sort of, like which category they're born into.
Yeah, and I mean, kind of this is a lot about what I write about in my PhD as well as and other stuff, which is to say that kind of liberalism successfully achieved bourgeois equality more or less in terms of overturning all legal obstacles, and then reached a point of crisis and kind of collapse and exhaustion because it did all these things. And everyone was like, "But things are still shit. Like you've done all the stuff, and then."
And look, I mean, there were people by like the late 1790s who'd kind of realized that, that just achieving this, wasn't gonna result in a society that wasn't shit, right? Like, I mean, this is why, those like, proto-communists at the sort of like tail end of the French Revolution, conspiracy of equals and all that stuff. Because unfortunately, it's pretty obvious.
Well,
right?
I mean, even in the English Revolution.
Yeah. The levelers and diggers and all that stuff. Yeah, sure. Yeah, totally. So you you want to say, okay, look, achieving this, like, we don't have serfdom, we don't have slavery, we don't have apartheid, women are allowed to vote, all that stuff, right? Like, this is all really important stuff. This is like real civilizational progress, but it also, like you're saying, like it only goes so far. You like, everything's still kind of shit, once that's been achieved. And so then, like, one level down, sort of deeper, you have what he calls left liberal equality of opportunity, which is where you say, okay, we're going to try to compensate not just for the sort of, we're not just going to try to remove kind of legal barriers, but we're also going to try to remove certain kind of social barriers that, like, so he gives the example of like Head Start programs to help with like early childhood education, to like try to get people who come from more disadvantaged backgrounds to, kind of better, starting point, as an example of a attempt to implement left liberal equality of opportunity. But then he says, but even that, it's not like, even that doesn't really get to the nub of the issue, because you can, left liberal equality of opportunity is still totally consistent with saying, well, if you don't like test well, and you don't have like the particular combination of cognitive potential and social aptitudes and whatever, like the particular combination of things that are rewarded by like kind of professional managerial class career hierarchies, the ability to schmooze in a compelling way, so people want to promote you, whatever, like, if you don't have that through no fault of your own, like, because everybody can get better at those things, but that doesn't mean, there's a limit, right? Then through no fault of your own, you could still end up with like way worse economic outcomes than people who do. And, we all like, and so he says, really what we should want is what he calls socialist equality of opportunity, which is where he says you just don't have any unchosen disadvantage, basically, that like, you say the kinds of barriers to people getting better outcomes we're interested in, or anything that doesn't stem from your own choices. That
there's a line you use, and it was one which made me incredibly suspicious, where you have Cohen saying something that basically says like, anything that we might really strongly desire or want, or something that we, do you remember the line I'm talking about?
Oh yeah. So this is, the socialist equality of opportunity formulation comes from his little thin book, Why Not Socialism, which is sort of the most accessible Cohen he has. But in his academic paper, Equality of What, he says, well, what we should, ultimately, he says, the most important kind of quality is equality of access to advantage. So he's just being incredibly general, right, about like what sort of things we're trying to equalize. And that's like, because I don't know, maybe I could like go back and look at that paper, and maybe there's like a more clarification than I'm remembering. But as far as I can recall, right, like that's just sort of good stuff, right? That's like,
right,
like
because that really sets me off, because you can accept, as you suggest, that kind of that garbage men should be paid as much as doctors.
Sure.
Or that we shouldn't even have a system where either of them get paid in any real sense,
Sure.
But I'm not at all with the idea that kind of a garbage man should have as much social prestige as a doctor. And maybe that makes me some kind of elitist. And I don't think you can possibly deny that kind of social prestige.
More. There should be, it's like, look, you have man, you're only willing to work at an antiseptic hospital. This man is a hero. He's willing to like get down there with the trash so that the rest of us don't have to deal with it.
Oh, obviously, because doctors don't have to go anywhere disgusting.
It's all disinfected.
This is just work. This is like kind of, I don't know. It's not quite tailing, but it's something that people do. It's quite funny. But yeah, I don't think you can possibly deny that social prestige is like, people will almost prefer social prestige to bread. Like as humans, we're desperate for social prestige. So I don't think you can possibly deny that it doesn't fit kind of Cohen's formulation as it was written there. Totally. Unless there's some kind of clarification otherwise. So for me, that really sets me off, and it kind of gets to the stuff that I'm really suspicious of on the left, where it feels like people are rejecting the idea of merit.
Yeah. So, okay, so that's interesting. So I would say that, look, so we want to separate out a couple of different issues. One is what's the sort of, what's the sort of ideal, like what would count as like maximal distributive justice? And then the other is, okay, but like on balance, what do we actually want? Right. So, like, because you could come up with any number of dystopian things that would, that would like give people more equal outcomes in one way or another. Right. You could have, I give the example there of like redistributing eyeballs, to the blind against people's will, which is an example.
There's some kind of like famous novel they assigned in high school about, or is it a short story
Harrison
about where
Bertram.
basically like a society where they weigh down the strong with weights,
Yeah, I think that's the curve.
That leads to them becoming like going Super Saiyan because they're so strong at the end or something.
Yeah.
It's a ridiculous story.
Yeah, sure, right. But it's like, but yeah, we don't want Harrison Bergeron. We don't obviously, on balance, that would be very bad, to do that. And it also could just be that there's like, whoever's right in that very serious debate we were having about, how we should award social prestige to different professions comparatively, right? It's not like we want, like we might just sort of see some value in people exercising, critical evaluation of things, and sort of seeing things clearly as they are or something, which would be that like some people, enjoy less social prestige than others, or, we have, we certainly, or also like it could be that, look, if, as we equalize resources, that we need to actually, we really need to lean on social prestige, like as an incentive to get people to become doctors, for example, right? That's like, if we're not going to give you more.
For me, it's like under communism, if we aren't, when you write a novel or you do any kind of creative work or whatever, if the reward isn't social prestige, it's nothing, right?
Yeah,
and
totally.
Obviously, some people will do it for self-satisfaction or whatever, but then why even publish it, right? If you aren't getting some kind of social reward, you're getting nothing. And then
sure, yeah.
Why does anyone bother to do anything apart from like Heroin 2?
I'm so curious about Heroin 2 now.
I mean, it's just fentanyl.
See, I was thinking that like this would be some kind of amazing, like high-tech communist future heroin that like we can't even imagine, but it's like now just fentanyl. Okay, so yeah, right. Like, I think that's all reasonable. It's all like, look, we could say there are a variety of things that for all sorts of reasons.
To be clear, people in chat are very against the social prestige thing. I don't know if you've been reading, but we are live. We should bring up the fact that there is a chat there.
I've glanced at it a few times, but look, I mean, I'm not even like particularly, it could be that like social prestige has its uses that for all sorts of reasons, right? That like, we want to have people who are doctors. So when we get sick, we want to have great novels because we value, beauty and, human insight or whatever. And so like on balance, very evenly awarded social prestige, could be totally justifiable for any of these purposes. And, you could also, I should also say probably a lot of this, you could just like, you could just sort of do a friendly amendment to Cohen where you say, well, come on, advantage is too much, man. Let's come up with some narrower concept that we want to, that we want to, just say resources or something. And much of what,
that relates it more to the material or the concrete.
Much of what all these guys say would still be true. I mean, I do, I do think it's like a little bit complicated because I think if we like, assign like, we do all think it's like really objectionable to like assign prestige on the basis of like skin color, which I'm not suggesting that that's like morally analogous to assigning it on the basis of writing a great novel, but it does suggest that we don't see how social prestige is assigned so totally morally neutral.
Well, I mean, it's obviously interesting that I think there's a very interesting thing about pretty privilege, right?
Yeah,
which is
the abolition of pretty privilege sounds maybe more dystopian than anything else we've talked about,
right? Because you think about it and you're like, well, it is actually unfair in some significant way that beautiful people are treated better than other people, but what the fuck can we actually do about it?
Sure, right? And like, so there's like sometimes there are things you can do. I think in Cohen's view, sometimes there are certain kinds of unequally distributed advantages that there's nothing you can do about, just practically. That they're just like, we can't come up with a solution. There could be things where we can come up with a solution, but it's not worth it on balance when we weigh other values that we care about, against this. That's all totally fair. But like Cohen's general point is that he thinks that a society is unjust to the extent that it's still distributed advantage on the basis of factors. It's still unequally distributed advantage on the basis of factors outside people's control. So that that you have that if you're worse off because of things that you can't control, whether that be race or gender or whatever, or whether that be you're born into a better or worse off family, or whether that be you don't like have the like there's a point in the essay where I use the example of like a society that's ruled by a warrior caste, but it allows for upward mobility. You can win a spot by trial by combat. Like I would be profoundly fucked in that society. And that does maybe selfishly strike me as objectionably unjust.
And also, it's not great again for whoever's getting trialed against, right?
Yeah, totally, right.
I mean, normally, even when you have like a successful warrior caste, it's only not very fun for the warrior caste either.
Sure, yeah, and some, not all, but some of these points apply to the kinds of even kinds of inequalities, with not just the kinds of inequalities within capitalist society that come from like, okay, is your dad Jeff Bezos or a warehouse worker, but like also the kinds of inequalities that like meritocrats celebrate about capitalism, that like it's like, oh, certain exceptional people can excel and get the climb their way up the class structure and all that stuff, right? Cohen still thinks even that's objectionable because the feature being rewarded, even though they're different features than the warrior caste example, are still undistributed. You don't get to pick whether you have them. So at this point, it looks like there's there's a merit badges. If you have merit badges,
the Soviets were actually
distribute them unequally, or I don't know what the point is of having them.
The Soviets, with all their medals, that was their transition to a communist society. They're eventually going to replace money just with badges and medals.
You have the that's man. I would have loved that if that were like, in the Critique of the Gotha program, if in between the lower phase of communism, where we distribute consumption on the basis of what you put in production, and the higher.
Well, no, I mean, he just kind of says that there should be some limit to kind of how things are distributed, and he suggests it could be kind of expiring money or whatever, fake money, not real money in some significant way. But it could also be badges.
Well, that's the thing. It's like maybe in between that lower phase where you get to actually consume more if you work more, and the higher phase where we just don't worry about this shit anymore because there's so much to go around and we have so much material abundance. If he proposed a middle phase where resources are all distributed into equally, but like work incentives happen on the basis of like gold star stickers. Which I can see it, but yeah. So right now it looks like there's a fairly straightforward difference that that Rawls is willing to say, okay, we can have less inequality in exchange for more efficiency that benefits everybody, and Cohen is said no, we're going to insist on this higher standard of quality, and again, people want to see that, like a sort of natural frame to look at that through, given knowing a couple things about each of these guys is okay. Rawls is a liberal, Cohen's a Marxist, so that makes sense. Cohen is to Rawls is left on equality. But then where I think it gets more complicated is that there is a certain sense, we're just talking about the Critique of the Goethe program, there's a certain sense in which Marx in there signs off on something that sounds a lot like the difference principle to me, saying that in the lower phase of communist society, it's, like, yeah, I mean, he does suggest having distribution, and I'm trying to be very careful about my formulation, because it'd be a lot easier to say this if we could just say like how much you're paid or something like that. But clear that we're not talking about money anymore. Exactly.
How much of your not money you get?
Yeah. How much of your not money you get is going to be based on the duration or intensity of your labor. And then like, even though, he's saying, look, it's not like people deserve more for duration or intensity. He's very clear on that. He's like, look, he makes this very Cohenian point about how unevenly distributed talents of all kinds are in the Critique of the Goethe program, that some people can work harder or longer than others. Some people have different capacities. But he says, but like the idea certainly seems to me to be, well, like in this early phase of communist society, communism emerges directly from capitalism, given that people still have attitudes towards work that, that are held over from capitalism, given that you don't have this material superabundance yet, then you want to set things up in this way so people are rewarded for, duration or intensity, so as to have more people working more, and you've built up, so you can get to that abundance, which sure sounds to me like saying, yeah, okay, a little bit of inequality not under your control is okay, because it gets you to, because that like more stuff ends up being produced, which is better for everybody, which is just the difference principle, and so now it seems like Marx perversely is actually on Cohen's side of the argument, and
Rawls.
Yeah, is on Rawls' side of the argument, not Cohen's. But I think there's a sense in which he is. There's a sense in which he isn't. I know we're running. I know we're running a little bit over time here, so I don't know whether to just say, hey, read the essay, or to where you want to take the last part of the conversation.
Oh, sorry, I had something to say and I've kind of lost it in that.
Okay, all right, yeah.
What were we on?
Yeah, so the question that I'm interested in asking here, like part of the impetus for this, like I remember, I can remember.
All right, yeah, I was going to say that for me, it kind of seemed to me like what you were doing was kind of being like, everyone thinks Marx is like the total equality guy. Mm-hmm. But if you really look into it, he's actually not the total equality guy. But for me, I'm like, well, Marx isn't the equality guy.
Yeah. Marx is
the freedom guy. Marx is the guy who says, the bourgeois class has said that in modernity, we've kind of freed people, we've freed desires, we've freed human capacity to do anything at once, to build anything at once, not just to be affected by the world, but to change the world in complete ways, to build the Suez Canal, to build the Panama Canal, to change how the continents are shaped, to change how the seas flow, and all those kind of things. But the Marxist says, okay, you've done all that, but you're slave to this one silly principle that all these things have to make money.
Yeah.
And so instead of 1,000 different laws of the feudal class, where saying, you can't raise doves even if you really want to because you're this class and you're not that class, they've condensed all these laws into one simple law. That we have to be subject to money. But this law is just kind of like a simplified tyranny. And the real, and it's the thing which is against general human freedom. And the move is to say, well, why do we have to care about that law? Why can't we just engage in whatever projects, whatever creations we want? And for me, kind of equality is kind of something, if it's important, it's important to set the grounds for that, because you're abolishing all. To do that, you need to abolish kind of all the systems which would structure society so that it has to flow based on these rules, so that you have to abolish all the things that would restrict various persons from doing the things they want, and so on and so on. But for me, kind of the equality stuff is kind of just secondary.
Well, yeah, I get that. I mean, I think that Marx, is fairly clear, in that discussion, the critique of the Goethe program, that he's not, indifferent to straightforward distributive equality like of consumption. That his analysis is that, the reason that we have one that's so bad under capitalism is that it's a function of capitalist property relations. You change the property relations, you'll change, that you'll end up with different consumption, and he does have views about that he expresses, says, like, basically, again, it's so hard to do this without, using terms that are going to be inaccurate, like money or the state, but like all these like welfare statey kinds of things that he talks about in that first chapter, he says, like, we're going to have much more of that under socialism, which he certainly seems to think is a good thing. But look, I agree with you that, like, where his like heart really is, like what he cares about the most is freedom, right? Freedom to pursue your own projects, etc. Which it's also, like, bring in that famous quote from Capital Volume 3 about the realm of freedom. That like starts when we leave, the realm of like having to work. That basically, look, just because you work in a worker-controlled factory doesn't mean that you suddenly like working in a factory. Is it
Badu or someone else who says, the hell is the firm?
Yeah,
not who owns it.
Yeah. I think that's true in one way. It's not true in another. Maybe that's a different discussion. But they have but yeah, right. Like, but like what Marx is very, very concerned with is your ability to, like, look, if you read Capital, ultimately, when he talks about exploitation, like, where he's like, okay, we could do this by talking about money, we could do this by talking about value, but what he's really most interested in is like the extraction of surplus labor, is your time being taken away from you, right? What he's most concerned with is, like, your time being your own to pursue. Like, going straight from the economic and philosophical manuscripts of 1844, where he has that, like, prose poetry about, going fencing and going to plays and all these things, that make us really human, to up through that, discussion in Capital Volume 3. Like, this is a consistent thread throughout all his work. He's really interested in this kind of positive freedom, this freedom to, this ability in practice to live your life how you want to live it, to pursue the projects you want to pursue. But what I would suggest to sort of tie it in with Rawls and Cohen is that, hey, that is a kind of advantage. It's the kind of advantage that Marx is most concerned with, and it's one that is very unequally distributed under the first phase of communism, because if consumption is still tied to how much time you're spending at work, then which it very explicitly is in the critique of the Goethe program, description of the first phase of communism, then yeah, your how much of your time is your own to pursue your own projects, is unevenly distributed, because you are still being, forced to some extent to work in some of the, like, even much less so, but to some degree, the way that you are under capitalism. So this is still, like, you're right. Like, I think he cares more about ultimately he cares more about the sort of advantage that we get from being able to have our own time and pursue our own projects. But that's still a good about which you can ask. Do some people have more of it than others? And if so, what justifies it?
But I think that's kind of importantly that's the manner in which he kind of endorses the difference principle, if we can say he does, in the way that I mentioned much earlier in the show, where I talked about a kind of a different Rawls, who, for these principles, aren't universal historical principles, but ones that apply to a particular area that emerge out of a particular subject. I think if there's a manner in which Marx endorses the difference principle, it's in that sense that I put. And yeah, obviously, kind of things in the lower stage of communism is not an ideal society, but that's kind of the point, right?
Yeah, well, that's the question, right? So it's not an ideal society, and that actually, I think, gets to something that we talked about a little bit earlier, but I did see it. I have not been reading most of the chat, but I see bits and pieces, that like I see has been brought back.
I've been reading it all, which is quite hard while I'm also listening to you, and also I've been drinking, by the way.
Yeah. You should probably focus on drinking and talking, and do less of the look at the chat, but look at it a little bit. Right?
No, these are the people. They're the ones that matter.
I mean, it sounds to me like you're now who's Nick Allen.
Now I'm the garbage man.
Yeah. No, but like say, how can Marx be the sort of freedom guy or the equality guy, or like have any sort of conception of what's an ideal society because he's the historically determined guy. And this is something that I would kind of hold the line on to say, yeah, look, Marx definitely like there's a famous line in the Critique of the Growth Program where he says right could never be higher than the material conditions that give rise to it, or something like that. I'm messing it up slightly, but like it's very close to that. And that's often quoted in order to show that he doesn't believe in sort of trans-historical standards that you can judge particular societies at particular times against, but this is not a point that's original to me. I mean, Cohen says in his essay about Isaiah Berlin, seems to me that it shows exactly the opposite, that it shows that he does believe that, right? In other words, like that if if he says right can't be higher, right? That's like we're suggesting that that there is a scale of higher and lower, and sure, how high you can get up on that scale depends on the material conditions of any particular society, how those exchanges with nature to meet human use values, work in that society. But it also suggests that we do in fact have a scale, right? That we could use to judge different societies against. And once you've got a scale, I'm afraid you are on the ideal theory business, I mean, like, which I think how his implicit ideal theory fits with these other ideal theories we've been talking about. I think that's like a much more substantive issue that, I think there's like way more room for disagreement on. And, I guess read the essay, but I think, and then, I guess at some point we're going to have to schedule a time for you and me to argue about the veil of ignorance too.
Yeah, we can if you want. I mean, yeah, reverse heaven. I mean, now that I've called it reverse heaven, we have to do. Now that's my kind of original thesis.
Yeah. Yeah. What we should really do is you should just write a guest essay on the Substack called "Why I Don't Believe in Reverse Heaven," and then I could, and then we could do one of these and talk about
exactly.
it. So I should say this essay that we've been talking about, for anybody who missed the one of these we did last week, is on the shiny new philosophy Substack, Philosophy for the People. That's benburgess.substack.
Let me post the link.
.com.
Can you see the viewing numbers, by the way?
No, I can't.
I should have been posting this throughout, but I wasn't.
Yeah.
But no, we were up to like 115, 120 at
nice.
some point, so very good.
Nice. But I see, there you go. The people, the people want more G.A. Cohen.
Yeah, they're definitely here for Cohen.
Yeah.
Not our dulcet tones.
What's that?
Not our
Not our
dulcet
dulcet
tones.
tones. No. Nope. It's a Cohen. But yeah. So yeah, we'll switch. Yeah, exactly. Give them a counter argument. In all seriousness, if you want to do
This
that.
is true. You can just have a series of taller guys. You don't need an absolutely tall guy unless we're Platonists.
Yeah. I mean, what you need is a way of deciding what the direction is, right?
Yeah.
So, like, you could.
Yeah, it's a standard of assessment, right?
And once you've got a way of, I mean, in a way, I mean, we do. I mean, look, we do have a conception of what the maximally tall guy would be, a guy who's infinity feet tall.
Do we?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a real object in our minds, though. In the same sense that we can't really, like, 1,000 people and 10,000 people look the same to us.
Yeah, but like there's but so there are two questions there, right? One is like, what would be I don't know why I'm dying on this hill, but I'm just going to go for it. They have one would be what's
Stefan and Ben do metaphysics really badly. We should end every show doing that. We kind of began the last show doing that, but we should end every show doing that.
Yeah. We just start like doing some like really esoteric metaphysical subject that neither of us have thought about at all, and just kind of like doing it on the fly. It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, do we have a conception of a maximally tall person? You can say maybe there's one that's like logically implicit in the way that we use height terms, even if we don't have a good intuitive sense of what it is. I didn't even see that. Read the label.
It's a cider, which is also blood orange. I thought it would just be kind of a hint of orange, but it's orange as fuck.
Fair enough. Yeah. So yeah, we'll get. We're still improving. We'll next week we'll get a little crawler with the Substack link on the bottom of the screen. But
what's the? Have you decided what the next essay is?
Yeah. So the next essay is in one way going to. Well, let me put it this way. In one way, it's going to be similar to the subject this week because they're both about Marxist philosophers. Or in part about Marxist philosophers, because this week was in part about Cohen and Marx himself. But relative to that, I think it is as far as it could possibly be from the kind of Marxist philosopher we were talking about this week. So it's here's a further hint. The person next week's essay is going to be about doesn't live in Croatia, doesn't live in Serbia, but we are in the right part of the world.
Not Slovakia either.
Not Slovakia. Although we are.
You're keeping it secret, or you just you're not far through it enough to really tell.
Yeah. I haven't decided yet. No. No, it's the. So the world's most famous Slovenian is Melania Trump, and then I guess Luka is number 2. This would be number 3.
Great.
Yeah. No, it's gonna be about Slavoj Žižek. Could drop the pretense. Yeah. So it's a very because obvious, like, okay, so the first one was historical philosophy, but it's sort of proto-analytic historical philosophy. It's a the kind of English philosopher or Scottish, whatever, same difference. People all look the same thing. But who 20th and 21st century analytic philosophers love David Hume. And then and then this one was, other than Marx, about contemporary analytic philosophers. And so thought it might be interesting to do one about like the least analytic philosopher in the world, who nevertheless I'm a big fan of.
You missed it because you aren't in the Sublation chat, but I fucking hated Zizek's latest Guardian article, maybe it was one before, the one about Ukraine. I hated it so much. But then the one he published in Sublation was actually quite good. I quite liked it. Doug thought I would hate it, but I quite liked it actually.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with a lot of his commentary on the Ukraine stuff, which he is not unaware of. That I disagree with this. I saw him in person last summer, and it, I mean, nobody yelled at anybody or anything, but it came up briefly because he's he said something about anyway, basically I think he thinks that I'm like a unreasonable hippie about stuff like that, but
well, at least you're not a Stalinist like me. Well, he's meant to be a Stalinist too, so I don't know how that works.
That's confusing. Like definitely everybody agrees that the problem with Zizek is he's either too much of a Stalinist or not enough of a Stalinist. That like,
yeah, I mean, and to be clear,
we could all agree that he isn't hitting just the right level of Stalinism.
To be clear, I quite like Zizek. I don't hate him. I did really hate that essay though, but that's kind of it's good. It's good that he can inspire us to hate him too. Because most people can't make me hate them. They're not nearly that powerful,
Yeah, no, he's I mean, look, he definitely has opinions that I disagree with. He definitely not just that one. He definitely has like intellectual influences that are very alien to me. I mean, I have like, if you're waiting for the Substack post where I give you all my opinions about Lacan, they have you will wait in vain. But I do think that he's like pretty interested and insightful, that there's some stuff to say there. But I will endeavor to be more concise about it, and we will. I guess we'll talk about that next week. I should also say that since we're entering into the 2-week zone where we should never be doing anything on either This Is Revolution or GTAA without mentioning this. So it is worth mentioning that 2 weeks from today, on January 22nd, not Stefan, who's stuck on a dismal island across the ocean, but a bunch of other This Is Revolution people, or certainly at least a couple others, Jason Miles, Deep State Cuba, and then me, the GTA crew, Jake and Andy, as well as various alumni producers of the show. We've gone through a couple, but they'll all be there. And Matt and David from Left Reckoning, and Emma Vigeland and Bhaskar Sankara and Sam Cedar will all be at this live show, Give Them a Revolution show in New York. So that's at Penn Station. It's at the Cutting Room, which is like half a mile away from Penn Station. At doors open at 6. Show starts at 7 on January 22nd. And I presume that Gene put a link to that in the description for this episode.
Possibly.
Possibly.
I'd link it, but I don't have the link. Like, why don't we just Google This Is Revolution live show?
I mean, yes, you can certainly do that. But yeah, I mean, if you just Google like This Is Revolution Cutting Room or something like that, you'll definitely see it right away. But yeah, we should be dropping that link into everything. You will get to see various characters from the TIR, GTA, LR extended universe, either on stage or at least milling around. Jordan Dubin, all the Dubin heads out there, can go say hi to her, before or after the show.
You might be able to find out what Toussaint looks like.
You might, yeah. This is, yeah. I mean, we would.
You won't find out what Toussaint's duck looks like, sadly, though.
Yeah, I mean, we would show you on screen, but it's like drawing Muhammad. You can't do it. There's a ban on visual representation of Toussaint, but she will be there in person at the show.
Great. Well, let's end it there.
Sounds good.
Let me press the fucking button. I mean, I feel like chat would just keep going for like half an hour more.
So
having fun talking to each other. I haven't done it yet. No.
Okay.
I'm doing it now. I'm clicking
okay. Sorry. The tone of your voice made it sound like you thought we were off there.
No. I just want to ruin chat's game.